Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a progressive campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We work with non-profit and community-based organisations, trade unions, progressive businesses and social democratic parties across the globe to develop campaign strategies, train engagement staff in leadership and power building, and help you execute your campaign with data-driven tactics and actions. And in 2022, or what's literally left of it, and next year, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to share their stories, inspire others, take action and organise communities for change. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. Today's episode is also proudly brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn have the experience you need on your side when something goes wrong. They know the law inside and out and will explain every detail without legal jargon, so you feel comfortable and fully understand your situation. They know how the system works and have the expertise and resources to continue standing up for clients on matters where others might just give up. To find out more, visit their website, mauriceblackburn.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast, which is out every Friday, that dives into the progressive campaigns and the issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And today is our second of 4 December end of year recaps. This is our Victorian State recap, and it's also the one that we always record just before Christmas, and it's always the one that we do with Harriet Shing, one of my good friends and the Upper House member for Eastern Region. And as we record this, the VC still haven't finished the count for the Upper House, but she's looking good to get re-elected. And she's going to be on the show again today just to sort of recap the year that was politics here in Victoria. So always looking forward to that chat with Harriet. And don't forget, if you like the show, be sure to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcast and on Spotify. And when you're done listening to today's episode, leave us a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. And for all the updates, follow us at Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Okay, let's get to today's episode. Okay, we are taping this one on a Wednesday afternoon on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And as we do every year, this is an annual thing now. It's just like New Year's Eve in Times Square when the balls drop. But this is our Christmas version of it. We get my good friend and the member for Eastern Region, and soon to be once again confirmed that she will be the member for Eastern Region, but they just take a little bit longer to count the Upper House in a state election. Harriet Shing, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Hello, it's lovely to be back. I think we have we've really solidified our status as having a Christmas tradition. It's kind of like baking yourself while you stuff down 3 different types of roast meat next to Uncle Phil, who's travelled 450 kilometres and is staying probably a little bit longer than the family might like.
And start sentences with like, I'm not racist, but...
I've never heard a sentence like that, so it's good. It's not in politics. You never hear that sort of thing in politics.
Yeah. I genuinely look forward to this episode. And it's not actually the last episode of the year, because we do have another one going up in between Christmas and New Year. But truth be told, I have already recorded that one. The very, very last episode I always do for the whole year before I knock off is always with you. And I never take it. The first one was meant to be serious and we got sidetracked right from the get-go.
Was it? It wasn't serious at all.
No, I can't even remember what we spoke about. So for those
possibly for the best, interpersonal chaos, I think, is probably the best description of it.
Yeah, exactly. So we do touch on serious things, and it is meant to be a wrap of state politics in Victoria for the last 12 months. But in amongst it all, we kind of get a bit off topic. We have a bit of fun. There's a bit of Christmas cheer. And we do things like I ask questions about how your donkeys are going.
Well, Christmas cheer and Christmas jeer in equal measure. Do you see where I went with that? No, there's always room for a bit of personalisation of conversations like this. I'm very firmly of the view that there's only so much dry commentary that people can take before they need to bust out into something quite ridiculous. So if that's what we're going to provide again today for the, I think, 4th year running, then good for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So how are the donkeys going?
They're good. They've been a bit stroppy with me because of being on the campaign trail for so long, and so they have a tendency to look quite disapproving. that's their mad skill, is to look disapproving. So I get a bit of that, but otherwise they're doing well. They've well and truly established themselves as independent young men, and they in effect don't need me.
Well,
It's nice to be it's nice to be the parent watching my little boys grow up so fast.
I was going to say, are they teenagers now? Are they kind of giving you teenage vibes?
No, they're well. Firstly, they're not actually growing up because they're tiny and they're never going to get any bigger. Secondly, I think they're probably tweens. So we're in that in between age now. I think they're about 3.5, which means in a donkey's years, comparatively speaking, they can live up to the age of 50. So who knows? They could be anything. They're roustabouts.
Right.
I'm stuck with you forever. They're stuck with me. It's a good arrangement.
Teenage boy donkeys. I just assume that they're in their pen playing Nintendo and treating their body like an amusement park.
Well, I mean, I suspect that they're probably envious of all of their mates who get to go out and frolic in forests and deserts, and I'm the strict mother who doesn't let them do anything like that. And in essence, they're quite justified in hating me.
Very good.
I've yet to hear someone say that they wish they'd never been born, but I suspect that might be just around the corner.
Did you ever pull that on your parents?
Oh yeah, I never asked to be born. I mean, and then you see that this is actually then a conversation that makes it to the Supreme Court. It makes it to all sorts of superior jurisdictions around the world. And you think, we've really come a long way where arguments such as "I never asked to be born" or "shut up, no, you shut up" actually become legal doctrines.
Indeed. I am the youngest of 5, and I kind of feel like a quasi-only child because the nearest sibling to me is 9 years older than me. My eldest brother is 18 years older than me. So by the time I kind of hit my teenage years, everyone had nicked off to Melbourne to go live their adult lives. So I kind of was an only child, but in a big family. And I used to always really try and question my mum about who was your favourite, because my mum used to run the, I love all of you, you're all equal in my eyes kind of thing. And I go, no, honestly though, you've got a favourite. And then I'd try and roll out arguments as to where I could get ranked, not looking to be favourite, thinking that I was down the pecking order, but she never broke.
She never broke to you. That's the thing. And that's, I suppose, the code of being a parent, is that you have to hold on to the fact that notwithstanding the fact that one of your children or more of your children you might get along with better than others, human being to human being. I'm a middle child of 5, so I am the incessant, annoying one. And I didn't actually walk. I didn't walk until I was 2, and I unsurprisingly talked very early on, and I've continued in the way that I started.
So you identified with Jan in the Brady Bunch?
I really did, but I would never have accepted that then. I still am quite reluctant to accept that now. It's one of those. Marsha is really the thing that you face when you're a middle child in a family of 7. It's, you know how it is. As the youngest, you get coddled, and as the middle child, I had to fight like Mel Gibson in Braveheart, just to get some scraps from the dinner table. May or may not include slight exaggeration.
Let's actually. Last time you spoke, obviously, was at Christmas last year. Since then, you were appointed into the ministry of the previous Andrews Labor government. Mazel tov on that. So we haven't spoke since then. So well done. About time.
Thank you. Yes, water, regional development and equality, which to my mind is the holy trinity of good portfolios. And should I be returned when the VEC decides that it's going to carefully and painstakingly complete the process of going through every single vote by hand, then I look forward to being re-sworn into those portfolios and to adding Commonwealth Games legacy to the mix.
Minister for Water, if you were a politician from the 1950s and you were transported into the future and discovered there was a ministry for water, I think that would be a bit odd.
Would it? because and this is where water people absolutely love water. We have an evangelical zeal for the technical detail of good evidence-based policy, and we are forever flummoxed that nobody else seems to share that enthusiasm. So the thing about good water and infrastructure management is that when it's working well, nobody cares about it. And when there's not enough water, and when you've got situations of prolonged drought or high volatility with the sort of climatic conditions we're seeing now, that's where there's a hugely important role to play in the preparation and the planning and the implementation of good policy, and having the right sort of infrastructure there that's not privatised, as our mates in the coalition were indicating that they would do as a key election promise in the lead up to the recent poll. So water is a great thing to be part of. There is a small and very enthusiastic band of us across the world who love the way in which good water policy operates, everything from a desalination plant through to sustainable water strategies, traditional owner access to water, environmental water flows, managing competing priorities from irrigators, from landholders, factoring population growth into the mix, and of course managing what we know to be long-term forecast drier than average conditions.
I was going to ask, do you like water? But clearly you do.
Yeah, see, it's one of those things where I actually absolutely love it. And one of the really great things about many of the community organisations, the water authorities, the catchment management authorities, land care groups, is that there are so many people who are really passionate about the way in which water as an enabler can facilitate so many good things happening socially, economically, from a community-based perspective. And we get those things right, then we build a measure of security into our systems to be able to withstand what we know are going to be difficult conditions. And 16 of the last 20 years have been below average rainfall. So now you've gotten me started on water, so you better change topic or we will be here all day.
Well, let's do that. I know it's meant to be a wrap of the year, but I think I'm not going to do it in a linear way. I'm going to bounce all over the place. And I actually want to go to election night. I was driving out to Mulgrave from the Socially Democratic / Week on Wednesday election night coverage telecast that we did with Van Batten and Ben Davison, which was a lot of fun. And I was driving out to Mulgrave, hopefully to try and get there before the Premier got up and gave his speech. Did that. And as we were driving out, we chucked on a bit of ABC radio. And who's on the radio? It's your favourite politician, Harriet Shing, having a bit of a chat. Now, who was the Tory that was on the telecast with you?
Oh, that was Nick McGowan, who looks to be elected to the upper house and was Matthew Guy's chief of staff. So he stopped being the former coalition leader's chief of staff when he indicated he was going to be throwing his hat in the ring for a seat in the upper house. It looks like he will get over the line. Again, chalk and cheese in terms of politics. I think one of his opening salvos was a lament about the politicisation of personality politics, and that it became dirty and all about misinformation. So I actually thought that was a mea culpa before he actually went on to say that was Labor's fault. So that was the way in which we got the evening off to an interesting and somewhat lumpy start. But then as the results started to come in, it becomes a bit hard when you are of a conservative bent, arguing for conservative and very oppositional politics and policies to see the count of Labor votes and Labor seats claimed just continuing to tick up at a rapid rate of knots. So wasn't an easy thing for him to do, and I was very pleased to be in the other chair as we looked at the results coming in and saw that, in fact, we were very well on track to be able to return an Andrews government, not just close to what our figures were in 2018 and the popular Dan slide, but in fact, as we now see with the counting, potentially to do better than that.
56 potentially if we and we're ahead in the count in Bass, where I haven't checked where we were in Pakenham. You can correct me in a moment, but I think we were ahead.
Yeah, we are ahead, and we're starting to see recounts and bundles being factored in and uploaded. There is a a somewhat mysterious process whereby those things are uploaded to the VEC and ABC sites. So people who are on the ground, who are scrutineering, who are checking through those votes in various places around the state will have more information, particularly about how those votes are either being confirmed or allocated against a different pile. But lots of candidates has also meant that as we move to below the line, we've then got preference flows and a pretty intricate process of counting the poll.
So you managed to be the bigger person on election night on the ABC with the.
Did I? I'm not sure about that.
Well, you certainly. I mean, the parts we heard for the sort of 25-minute drive out to Mulgrave from the city, you're on fire. But you certainly were far more restrained. If it had been me, I mean, I am a child anyway, I just would have been doing the whole suffering your jocks, stick it up your ass, that kind of stuff. Like, I just would have absolutely been reveling in it. But you were far more...
Well, no, I'm not going to pretend my little feet weren't going like flippers underneath the desk a couple of times in sheer enthusiasm for the results as they were coming in. And it was just... not just a relief, it was enormously gratifying to see that all of that hard work around policies and around decisions that are the right thing to do, that are about building and consolidating long-term growth and prosperity and health and wellbeing, that these were the things that people had resoundingly voted for. And to know that the narrative of the opposition, which was relentlessly opposed to everything that Labor had done, relentlessly opposed to the ideas that we were putting to Victorians to consider, without actually having any real alternative substance themselves, was something that voters saw through. And we know that the polling in the lead up to the election, and we'll get to polling and bias in a moment, but the polling in the lead up to the election gave an indication that things were perhaps tightening pretty dramatically. We always do see increased commentary in the weeks and days before an election. We see exit polls. You have to take that sort of information with a grain of salt. Every party, every group, every candidate will have an idea of where they think they are, and there's a confirmation bias that sits under that as well, around wanting for the platform that people bring to an election to be popular and to be well received. And on the night, we just saw that those discussions about a hung parliament, about a minority parliament, were pretty swiftly dispensed.
If there was the takeaway from the 2019 campaign, the criticism from the broader public and the commentary, it was that the polling was wrong. Then the criticism I think that comes out of this campaign in particular is the polling. It wasn't that the polling was wrong; it was the analysis of the polling that was wrong. And to the point that, like, if I could do my top 5 insanest moments of the campaign, one of them was the exit poll conducted by the brother-in-law, who was also the campaign manager for one of the freaky-deaky independent candidates running in Mulgrave, that basically just grabbed 159 people walking out of the booth at one point in time in the afternoon and then doing a poll on that. And then that getting a run on Sunrise, Channel 9 News. I mean, this, you know, wetting your finger and putting it in the air was far more accurate than what they did. And that this got legitimacy. I just was absolutely baffled. And when this was happening, I was like, oh, we've crossed the Rubicon now. Like, there's no going back here. This is ridiculous.
I think that it is broadly agreed in many progressive circles that the coverage of certain issues was amplified, where it indicated a trend against the government, against Labor, and that it received little to no coverage where it indicated that Labor and Labor policies were in fact being received well. Again, when you see the candidate who stood against the Premier in Mulgrave conducting his own exit polling, and you see that gets a huge run, when you see that people who are commentators actually creating a narrative that is based purely on what they think, it's the I reckon approach to political analysis. There's there's a long way to go to be able to give that sort of approach credibility, where time and time again we've seen that it's just not accurate. It just doesn't reflect in many circumstances the way that voters are thinking. And when we think about the campaign in Melton, for example, Steve McGee, an extraordinary local member, had been the subject of a tsunami of criticism, of analysis that said that he was gone, and that, in fact, the independent candidate was going to sweep up through the middle. And he had some pretty significant backing as the independent in an effort by some to dispense with Steve McGee. And at the end of the day, Melton, whilst a tight election, was something which has in fact fallen to voters in confirming that Labor is in fact the right choice, the right fit. And we will see some tightening of numbers across the board. We've seen that in the West and the North. We will see our percentages of leads really come back. I think that 2018 was a high watermark for many of those seats, and that from here, as I said on the ABC at the end of the night, I think everyone's got a lot of work to do to make sure that major parties in particular have policies and have engagement and strategies and decisions and resources that reflect the needs of communities and that aren't simply delivered without that social licence that's so important for people to feel respected and recognised in what it is that they want to achieve in their everyday. And it's also about people don't want to hear from their politicians. They hate us, and often that's not without good reason. And it's then about saying, in an increasingly difficult environment, particularly where we had a federal election, we just had local government elections, to have a state government election where people didn't actually connect with that process until very late in the piece, for people to have a conversation about what it is that they want and need, and also to be aware of the things that have been delivered, whether that's level crossing removals, 3 and 4 year old kinder, free TAFE, the way in which we've delivered a whole range of really huge infrastructure investments and record low unemployment. These are the things that people will take and bank, and then they will quite reasonably look to see what else can be offered, look to see how else communities can be supported. And it's also about that engagement that says, look at where we are because of progressive Labor policy, and look at where we are because of a desire to and a commitment to do, to use the slogan, to do what matters.
The other thing I find interesting out of this campaign, in the lead up to it, some of these narratives you just touched on, and I can go a bit further on that as well, that were all proven to be wrong. Things like the Teals were going to make a big impact in Victorian state politics after the success they had at the federal, that this was going to be a referendum on Daniel Andrews and his handling of COVID, that Daniel Andrews was going to be a drag on the ticket, and that people would want to be hiding him from the campaign. That Daniel Andrews is the one who's been divisive in the community, which I found hysterically funny. We'll come back to that in a moment. All of those things, and there was heaps more as well, all were proven wrong. By about 9:30, all of those narratives just completely disappeared. You could just sort of see people in their own heads trying to work out, well, how do I respin this one, you know? Then it sort of became, and we had the Premier on a week or so ago on the podcast talking about it, like up until 6 o'clock on Saturday night of the election, the Matthew Guy and the Liberals, according to the media, had run a really good campaign, and that the polls are tightening and this was going to be a close race and all that kind of stuff. And well done to Matthew Guy and the Liberals are getting their shit together. But by 9:30, to try and take the gloss off of this amazing Labor victory, now it was the Liberal campaign wasn't very good, was it?
Yes, it was fascinating to see that shape-shifting happen even as the votes were coming in from about 7 p.m. on Saturday night. And the great mistake, I think, that was made in the coalition strategy was, on the one hand, to make this all about the Premier, to make it all about Daniel Andrews, but to fail to actually engage with Matthew Guy as an alternative. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew what he stood for. Nobody knew what his brand was. He was alternately out and about announcing number plates or nowhere to be found when it came to scrutiny of opposition conduct, for example. And when you have a set of political narratives that are based entirely on being not Labor, the inevitable question that voters will ask is, well, if not Labor, then why you? And time again, the Coalition and Matthew Guy failed to give people a well-founded reason to actually say, well, okay, you do have some good policies. I don't think that all of their policies were terrible, but I do think the way that they sold them was uniformly terrible. And I think it was lazy politics. I think that it was politics that was simply about opposing the very institution that they want to occupy. And you know that the Liberal approach to free market activity and minimal government intervention means that government it's actually an inherently uncomfortable place for them to be. Their role, if they are in government, when they are in government, is to essentially take themselves out of the play. And so when you look at that and you look to the sorts of interventions that have happened over the last few years to provide really strong economic, social and health-related investments, and you compare that against the vacated space of the Liberals saying, well, you know, we will just let things happen by themselves, you can see why it was that the Liberals and the Nationals, the Liberals to a much greater extent, failed to resonate with voters. And the Teals, another interesting example. I think that when we talk about the Teals in the federal space, there was a much greater delineation between the Teal approach to gender equality and to representation of women in Parliament against a coalition which had far too few women sitting on its benches and far too few women sitting on front benches, and the climate action narrative as well. And when we think about the Victorian government and the fact that it is a majority of women in cabinet, it is, I think, we are at either an equal division of men and women in the caucus or slightly ahead now because of the number of women in the caucus. And our renewable energy targets and the way in which we've committed to bring back the SEC and to invest in net zero emissions and uptake of renewables really does neutralise the very reasons for the Teals to have, I think, carved out some pretty significant success at a federal level. So I don't think that transposing what it was that they did federally was going to succeed in the same way that it did against a coalition with a progressive Labor government here in Victoria.
I mean, to that point you said about the policy offerings from the Liberal Party, sometimes in the final weeks of the campaign, when you got a little bit more time on your hands, you do that mental arithmetic or that gymnastics in your head about, is this going to be close? Have we run the campaign we want to run? One way to sort of get yourself back on track and think, well, no, actually, we're executing a reasonably good campaign. There's no such thing as a perfect campaign. But if we went to the public with what the Liberal Party were offering, I would be starting to shit myself, because that's not, in my mind anyway, as a member of a progressive, modern, centre-left, social democratic movement, that's not offering enough to the community. Like you said, number plates. What was the other one? Something free.
Robots in hospitals. And again, when you think about robots in hospitals, without being able to explain the narrative that they will assist and that they will cut down inefficiencies, and then you say that you're going to put on 40,000 extra healthcare workers and you can't actually say how. And you can't actually say how you're going to fund any of your promises. And you have 70 uncosted promises the day before the polls. And then at the last minute, you say that you're going to privatise water infrastructure. These are the sorts of things that I think really consolidated people's fatigue with political promises that don't have substance to them. And I think that the coalition failed to identify what it stands for, failed to identify its vision for Victoria, and that many of its policies were either based solely in opposition, or they were sugar hits. Who cares about a number plate when, in fact, we're looking to have assistance in getting free TAFE and having courses added to that in renewable energy technology? There's a lot to be said for the way in which we market and brand and promote ourselves as a state. That absolutely has a role. But when you put a number plate announcement front and centre of a political campaign, which is very much about jobs, very much about growth, very much about services and programs and infrastructure, and that's what you have to take up a whole day of media, you can see that the strategy itself had nothing really confident about it. It was just, it was a grab bag of things that almost had been made up, from the insides of a fortune cookie and tossed into the ether, and the media was really kind to them about that. The number of front pages, I would like to think that perhaps 2018 was the most divisive set of public comments on the lead up to the election, and that was absolutely not true. This campaign was far and away the most bald example of bias that I've seen in any campaign in Victoria or indeed in Australia. Others will have a different view, but to my mind, it was too easy for certain commentators simply to jump on the bandwagon without actually thinking through the merit of opposition policies on the one hand, or the merit and the substance of government policies. And you think another example, that the announcement that the coalition was going to bring protective services officers into hospitals to assist with security and with patient engagement. And that this would, according to Brad Batten, who's now standing for the leadership, take pressure off the health system by being able to de-escalate challenges within a hospital environment. He was part of a parliamentary inquiry that found that that was a bad idea. And they offered that up in, I think, 2014 as an election announcement as well. It didn't have legs. It doesn't account for the intricacies and the complexities of the way in which aggression or trauma manifest in a health and hospital setting. And it was clunky. It was reactive. It was, again, a sugar hit. And it reminded me of that Law and Order African gangs narrative that we saw in 2014 and 2018. And it's just they rinse and repeat. And I think they've got some pretty hard thinking to do about what they stand for. And I think within the party, they are riven because you see very right-wing voices and influences on the one hand, and you see people who are putting themselves forward to try to be a moderating influence in a party that simply doesn't seem to know what it stands for.
When you mentioned Law and Order there, I was starting to shit myself because I've never watched that program, so I wasn't going to get the pop culture reference, but you weren't talking about the TV show. You were actually
in the criminal justice system.
Is Law and Order the one that goes dung dung?
Yes, it is. I in fact, many years ago, had a sound effect that when somebody came into my office, that noise would play. And I found it funny for about the first 748 times, and nobody else did. It's a bit like people who love water. You know, there are going to be people who like that sort of shindig.
No, I've completely lost my train of thought. Oh, David Davis is what I wanted to talk about. One of my other highlights from the campaign was his costings briefing that they do right at the end. What a train wreck that one was. And it was even so bad that even some of the conservative journalists, the Rachel Baxendales as well, actually had to write that they really stuffed up. And then what I loved about the campaign was they grabbed her quotes and the quotes from a couple of other Tories as well, and then put it on our materials, which then drove them absolutely spare. But it was beautiful. At that moment there, I thought, you know what, I think things are going to be fine. We're going to be okay. This is good. We're winding up not only the Tories, but also the journalists at the same time. This is beautiful.
Well, when you think about the lack of scrutiny of the coalition leader when he did press conferences, you compare that with the Premier, who has been known in recent years to do daily press conferences, up to 120 daily press conferences in a row for well over an hour, asking every single question. And you compare that with the former leader of the opposition, Matthew Guy, being asked a couple of questions, maybe a dozen, and then either walking away or everybody saying, no, that's it, we don't have any further questions. And it's that lack of scrutiny that I think people found endlessly frustrating. But then you have the halftime entertainment that is David Davis. And he has, as he's wont to do, and as I've seen him do over many years now, since I've been in the upper house with him, a great flamboyance around insisting that he's right. And that may work in a parliamentary context. It may work with the chest thumping and the grandstanding in a place that nobody really follows along with. That's there essentially to review legislation, to conduct inquiries, and to do the work of the other house of the parliament. David Davis in front of a media pack saying that he hadn't actually tallied a total after arriving late to a media conference, and then standing there presenting himself as the alternate treasurer of the state of Victoria, a Conservative treasurer under a Matthew Guy government, and not having that figure to hand was not only a breathtaking own goal, but it was also pretty emblematic of the fact that the coalition actually, they just don't care. They do not care for the sort of rigour that is required if you're going to be in government. Government's not easy, and if you think it's easy, then you shouldn't be doing it because you're doing it wrong.
Was Matthew Guy in that press conference with him?
Not that I can recall. I think it was Matthew Bark, who is, as I understand it, putting his hand up for deputy leader in the upper house. It's a shame that Matthew wasn't in a position to do that presser, because he is, and it doesn't sound like much of a compliment, but he's far more articulate and considered than David Davis. He had to stand there, though, chewing on the inside of his cheek while everything burst into flames around him. So I felt a degree of pity seeing that all unfold in a way that he couldn't do anything about. It
was the thick of it esque moment. Like, you could imagine Malcolm Tucker behind, in another room watching while this was going on, absolutely screaming obscenities at the television while this train wreck unfolded. I just thought it was hysterical. I loved it. And we're all seeing, David Davis, we've seen him when he's been under scrutiny. Remember that time they did that, I'm not in media. Can you half tell? They on the front of steps of Parliament, they wanted to do like a sort of they were trying to get testing done at home or something, and they got those nurses to shove the things up their nose. Do you remember that? And David Davis, the moment of truth came when the nurse was about to shove the swab up his nose, and he flinched at it. It was one of my favourite moments of the whole last 2 years.
I think there are ways to set up a public narrative and messaging, and to see Georgie Crozier, who was the Shadow Health Minister, a nurse, and not for many years, but a nurse, as she regularly reminds people, doing the PCRs with Michael O'Brien on the front steps or in the alcove of Parliament with a rubbish bin next to him in the shot, was almost one of those reasons to indicate that if they can't plan an event in a way that sends a message about things not being rubbish, then what can they do? And this is the way that they operate. It's the way that they work. And David Davis, for example, is an exceptionally good operator in opposition. He's a brilliant tactician, but when it comes to strategy and when it comes to the idea of occupying a role on the front bench of a government, he's a disaster. And I think everybody knows it. I think he's had a fair share of commentary for a range of other reasons around his character, and I don't think that any of what he did during the campaign was ever going to serve him well. And I think that the lineup of the rest of the coalition again didn't help, and so much so that you get the Nationals coming out a couple of days after the election and say to say that they're rethinking the arrangements of a coalition really does tend to indicate that nobody is really wanting to be in the same frame as the coalition because of the taint, I think is a reasonable word to use,
It's like the Seinfeld episode about hand. Now that I've got hand and you're going to need it, you know?
Yeah, and again, just to use Seinfeld again for a second, the coalition came along with a big salad, and they never paid for it.
Yeah, that's exactly. Oh,
Never paid for the big salad,
yeah.
and it's just all about taking credit for other people's work. And eventually, well, we stretched that metaphor, didn't we? Eventually, voters got really tired by it.
And the thing is that what the voters were looking for is they were looking for the black and white cookie. They wanted harmony. Look to the cookie, Elaine. Look to the cookie.
Well, you know what? You can't have the cookie in any way consumed without actually leading to intense discomfort. So I think that's almost like the moderate and the right-wing parts of the Liberal Party, if you want to stretch that metaphor a little bit further. They have got a leadership ballot coming up. Again, it's interesting to see who's been invited to that. There are a couple of candidates who haven't been confirmed, including a candidate who stood in the seat of Narracam in West Gippsland, and that was declared a failed election after the death of one of the candidates. And apparently he's going along to the ballot. So I'm not quite sure how it is that they've approached this with any sense of structural consistency. But what would I know about the mysteries of the Liberal Party when, again, you have Renee Heath being criticised, being told by Matthew Guy she won't be allowed in the party room, everyone then saying that she will be allowed in the party room under a new leader, and the fact that she spent her time campaigning in Mulgrave.
Is that true? Is that where she spent most of her time, was actually handing out in Mulgrave?
She was briefly in Pakenham, and as people would know, she hails from the Latrobe Valley and Central Gippsland. Her father is Brian Heath. You would have seen 60 Minutes and the really detailed analysis of the City Builders Church and Brian Heath's role in that. And you would have also seen the exposés that led Matthew Guy to say that given there was new material that had come to light, she wasn't going to be allowed to sit in a Liberal Party caucus room. And that then all turned on its head when Matthew Guy lost. And now we've got a range of different voices who want to occupy the top spot. And you can see that the pressure is on internally to appeal to the moderates and to appeal to the Conservatives and the right-wing components of the party, and that therefore everyone is trying to be all things to all people. And it seems like history is repeating itself yet again for the Libs. They don't know what they stand for. They're not able to have difficult conversations. Their membership is, I think, very different depending on where you are in the city and the country and the regional and peri-urban areas. And I don't think they've figured out how to actually get through this impasse for the next stage of a modern Liberal Party.
Good. Let's talk about Catherine Cumming. Interesting character. David Feeney had some choice words about her in our recent episodes. We did 4 of them and now they're all blurring into one. I think it was the episode we did just before Election Day, recanting her background into and entry into parliamentary democracy. But her remarks at that rally on the steps of under the clocks of the Flinders Street station in the weekend leading up to the election was pretty rank. Just want to get your take on that and what we were seeing from this sort of fringe element that kind of got a hell of a lot more media than probably they deserved.
Not surprising is how I would describe that. Catherine Cumming's approach to narratives and statements both in the chamber and in the outside world has been consistently divisive, based in misinformation and incendiary in the way it's been put and flung into the ether. Catherine has been a consistently damaging influence in the way in which the upper house has functioned. It should never go without saying that the upper house and indeed parliaments everywhere should comprise the people who have been elected to be part of them. That's non-negotiable. But when you see a member of parliament giving her middle finger to the parliamentary building while leaving the chamber, or leaving the precinct. When you see the comments that she's made on the steps of Flinders Street, when you see the way in which that ripple effect involves going to the front steps of Parliament, when there are crowds there who've also paraded nooses for people in government during the pandemic, you can see that this dog whistling isn't simply, it's not simply cavalier ineptitude, it's dangerous. And it comes with risk of significant harm. These are the sorts of, again, incendiary narratives that can lead to the most awful, the most tragic of circumstances. And when we see a critical mass of people, including from coalition benches, going out to meet with people who've been part of parading nooses around and describing those people as wonderful, you can see that, again, the Premier has described it as Americanisation of politics. You can see that that is a path that we're on. I don't think it's going to get any better. In fact, I think that it's going to continue to be a defining feature of our political landscape. And on the ground, during the campaign, the abuse and the threats and the intimidation were vile. It was the experience of at least every female candidate I know from Labor and progressive ranks, and the vast majority of men from our ranks as well. The way in which this social license was given to people to take what had otherwise been a keyboard warrior exercise and to be emboldened to scream at people centimetres from our faces is, I think, a really concerning development in the way that polling booths are run, the way that narratives are run. And also, I think the media has some responsibility to take in this space too. You cannot run stories that refer to criticism of the Premier when it's not criticism, it's on one view, and I think a not unreasonable view, it's inciting violence. It's inviting harm to a public figure.
Yeah, I'm just listening to you, and it just it does piss me off how the media kind of sort of played a role in this and then report about it going, oh, this isn't very good, is it? It's like, well, hang on a minute. Take some ownership of how you've elevated this. These people represent less than 1% of the Victorian population. You know, there are other well-meaning groups, organisations, collectives across our population that represent more than 1% and never get a look in. You know, you may not agree with their ideas, you know, the slightly raving loony party or whatever. They're out there just trying to do their things. They don't mean any harm to anyone though. And they don't get elevated because for whole heaps of reasons, but they might make up 5, 6, 7, 8% of the population. These guys represent less than 1%, and they were on the TV every frigging night. You know?
Yeah, but that's the sort of attention-grabbing stuff it's paint by numbers public commentary. You just pluck the most scandalising narrative you can find, the most divisive figure you can find. You run it as your first or second or third story in a nightly bulletin, and everyone has an opinion about it. And that's, I think, become in large part the modus operandi of many news outlets. And there are some extraordinary journalists. There are some brilliant journalists who don't just take your word for it that it's raining. They will look out the window and they will analyse whether it's raining before they put anything in print. But increasingly, I think we've seen journalists who are all too happy to run a line without actually taking responsibility for the impact of that line, or in fact countering it with different perspectives that really do render that sort of ridiculous hate speech irrelevant.
Let's talk about some of the positive things that comes out of a democracy, and that is passing legislation and then changing people's lives for the better. What are some of the things that you're proud of as a legislator? Or maybe, are you a legislator? You're a House of Reviewer. I don't know what you're doing. But anyway, you're doing something in that big building at the top of the hill that you're proud of over the course of 2022? Because there's been a fair bit of stuff that's come through the Parliament. Ones that you want to call out that you sort of said, yep, this is good, I'm glad we did this?
Yeah, we've done a lot of work across both houses to create and to deliver better legislative reform. So that might be the free TAFE, the 3 and 4 year old kinder work, the way in which infrastructure has been able to continue to be resourced and delivered. And it's this intergenerational investment in a Victoria 10, 20, 30 years from now, and projects, as has been said repeatedly, that we won't cut the ribbons on, but that deserve to get the attention that they deserve now to enable them to happen. We've also seen some pretty extraordinary efforts around the floods, and one of the things I think that has really almost disappeared from people's consciousness in the city has been the devastation of the floods up north in Victoria. We had that short-term interest because of the flood wall around Flemington Racecourse, but we've seen some of the most disadvantaged communities, like Rochester, like Echuca, be underwater for weeks at a time, and to be able to deliver packages of support has been really important, and also to make sure that we can continue to develop and to grow job creation opportunities. What does it mean to have better access to skills and training pathways? What does it mean to be able to access good healthcare? What does it mean to be able to provide for your family and to manage the cost of living and to embrace renewable energy technology in a way that not just benefits your bottom line now and your hip pocket now, but that also stands people in good stead for managing the costs of living into the future. And when you think about 3 and 4 year old kinder, for example, it doesn't just save parents an average of $2,500 a year per child. It also means that when we move from 15 into 30 hours a week of universal access to 3 and 4 year old kinder, that provides overwhelmingly women with the opportunity to return to paid work. And these are the sorts of interlinking policies that have financial and social impacts, and that stand people in good stead within their households, within their families, within their communities, to do better over time. And across the board, the last 8 years have been a staggering example in the scale of what's been achieved to invest and to grow and to deliver the lowest unemployment rates for regional Victoria that have ever been on record, so 2.8%, 3.1% unemployment in metropolitan Melbourne. And those figures will jump around a bit, but to look at what we've done in recovery and response off the back of a global pandemic shows that we are growing our way out of those challenges, and we are seeing prosperity, and that makes a difference as far as the equity of opportunity for more people. And that's an inherently Labor way. That is a proudly Labor way to develop policy and to make sure that everyone has opportunities, irrespective of where they come from, the wealth or otherwise that they've been born into, and the way in which they want to make a life for them and their family.
We always end the episode with some nominations for some Social Democrats of the Year in the great state of Victoria, both people in the community, but also within your caucus as well. Is there anyone you want to call out and nominate for Social Democrat of the Year? Let's start within the community. Well, who's some people in the community that's been doing some great work that you want to call out?
I'd like to call out Anne Tudor, and Anne is a long-term advocate for dementia awareness and ageing and residential care that considers LGBTIQ plus people's needs. Anne was the Senior Victorian of the Year for 2021. She and her late wife Edie developed the Dementia Forest Walk, which I would encourage people to go and see. It's in the Ballarat area, and it's been built to be 2 wheelchairs and 2 dogs wide, and it's essentially about making sure that people with cognitive decline have an opportunity to participate in the world around them. Anne was also one of the key motivators for the equality policy, which I launched before the election, which includes money for a pilot on LGBTIQ plus ageing and what that means to provide dignity and recognition so that older people who've often had really difficult lives don't have to go back into the closet because they're in residential aged care that doesn't recognise them or their relationships. So Anne is an amazing example of people doing extraordinary work in her community, across our communities. When we think also of the work that's happened within the caucus, that's a trickier one because so many people have worked their asses off in all sorts of ways to deliver for their communities and to be really articulate and really tenacious about the sorts of things that they want to achieve. And that might be from rural and regional development and making sure that there are opportunities within the Commonwealth Games and how we deliver the lead up to 2026 and good outcomes across the board there, through to an events calendar that provides us with pride of place and cements our reputation as being wholly better than Sydney, but also at the top of global lists on all sorts of criteria. And also the people who are working in and for their communities. You look at what Jordan Crignale has done in Bass. She is unassuming, she is brilliant, she is authentic, and she's entirely out of character with what you would imagine an MP to be. And knowing, as I do from not just having worked with her over the last 4 years, but having been out with her in the community, the impact that she has because she notices people and because she meets people on their level. She's one example, but she's a great example of what it means to deliver and how it is that communities recognise that and see that, and that they don't need bells and whistles and number plates to get that respect, where those conversations have been happening for 4 years and they've been happening with, again, a sense of diligence, a sense of service and a sense of passion.
And if the predictions are correct and she holds onto the seat of Bass, that's a remarkable effort given that her electorate, was cut in half, and the metro component of the electorate, which is the Pakenham area, it was a strange seat when you think about the boundary. For her to hold it is going to be a great outcome for her. So, let's hope that the counts go the right way for her in the coming days. Jordan Crignale, massive shout out to her. And again, a really good example of how we can and indeed should have more diversity in politics. We've got a lineup now of people from all sorts of backgrounds and ages making the most wonderful contributions. Jordan's a standout. I am so looking forward to the opportunity to see her returned and to see her hard work recognised. I know we're about to wrap up. Actually, that's one question I do have of this new parliament, this new Labor caucus, a whole bunch of new folks coming in. And one of the challenges of any long-term government is a lack of ideas and creativity that can sort of beset or clog up the internals of a government. But there's a whole bunch of great minds that have pulled the pin on their career, and fair enough too. They've been in there for a while. I'm thinking about people like James Molino, Marty Pakul. They've all moved on. A whole heap of others that don't come to mind right now. I'm sure you can think of them. Jala Pulford, but then there's a whole bunch of new ideas coming in because there's a whole bunch of brand new MPs. And as you said earlier in the show, there's more new MPs in the caucus now than there are Libs. Is that right? Is that the fact? Is that the figure you gave?
I think we're close. It is then a question of how we make sure that that diversity is reflected in the engagements we have and the way in which we develop policy. And hearing a number of the new members speak about their backgrounds and the things that have motivated them, we are talking about second generation migrant kids. We're talking about sparkies and engineers and teachers, and we're talking about people who have basically given their all in a range of different ways and are now in a position to contribute in public service that different perspective. And we are so much better for that. And again, to come back to the point about the Teals and why I think that campaign and that narrative didn't work in Victoria, we have one of the most diverse caucuses anywhere in Australia, and things are getting better, and progressive governments are leading the charge on that. Labor is leading the charge on that, but when you look at all that we have to offer and you look at the way that this results in better policy, results in better engagement, it results in better decision making, and it also makes sure that people across our communities aren't invisible simply because we're not straight, white, Anglo-Saxon blokes.
Hear, hear. Okay, before I say cheerio to you, Harriet Shing, let me just do a quick wrap up and then I'll come back to you in a sec. That's us done for another year, although there is another episode next week, but that's me done for the year anyway. So I want to take this opportunity to say a few words and say some thanks. First of all, thanks to all of our amazing guests that we've had over the 50-odd episodes that we've done this year. It's been a lot of fun interviewing everyone. Really appreciate both their time and their energy and their analysis and their stories. It actually is what makes this show tick. Can I say thanks to our presenting sponsors, Dunn Street? What an amazing organisation that is. So amazing. And also Morris Blackburn Lawyers, who have been some great sponsors that helped this program get off the ground. Can I say thank you to our producer, Rebecca Connell, whom without her, there is no Socially Democratic podcast. She books all the guests. She researches all the topics. She actually records the damn thing. She edits it all, makes it sound audible, and then publishes the episodes and then does all the social media promotions. She's an absolute dynamo, and I want to thank Rebecca for her work again this year. And lastly, to all of our loyal listeners and subscribers to the podcast, both here in Australia and also around the globe. Thank you to each and every single one of you for supporting the show by listening, liking, retweeting, posting, and just basically spreading the word amongst your own network of other social democrats. Actually, and I don't normally do this, but shout out to some of the folks that really do pump our tyres on social media. I don't know who you are, but these are our handles: Kazza Boots, Labour for Farah, Ian Hume, who always asks great questions when we do mailbag, Ronnie, and Ms. Melbourne. There you go. And I'm sure there's plenty more of you out there as well, but we just want to shout out to you guys because you're very, very supportive of the podcast and promoting us through our own networks. So we wish all of you guys a safe, happy, healthy and holy festive season. And we look forward to doing more episodes in the new year for our 5th season of Socially Democratic. And to you, lastly, Harriet Shing, once again, thank you for coming on and being our final guest for the year. It's our annual Christmas tradition. So great to see you. So great to sit down with you and just do a bit of a debrief of how things went in politics here in Victoria. And what a great way to end this year on such a historic election victory and cementing Labor's place as the dominant political force in Victorian state politics. Thank you for coming on the show again.
Thank you so much. I look forward to continuing to listen to everything you produce next year and can't wait to get stuck into the work so that we can continue to build what it was that we started back in 2014. Take care, everyone. Stay safe over the summer break.
Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. And to get all the latest on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday. Socially Democratic was brought to you by Morris Blackburn Lawyers. Morris Blackburn Lawyers have spent more than a century paving the hard path to justice for everyday Australians. They've helped over 500,000 Australians turn their situation around, and they know how the system works. Their experience and skills means you'll get the best results possible. Find out more on their website, morrisblackburn.com.au. Morris Blackburn, experience you can count on.